Welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience. Coming at you from the back of an 86 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. And welcome back, Nightbirds. It's great to have you back. I've got an excellent episode for you. I was joined by Mel Priestley, writer and astrology consultant. We talked not only about astrology, but also being initiated and building a relationship with the planets. Food is magic. Food is medicine. The power of intention. And the upcoming Mars-Uranus North Node conjunction. On top of all that, Mel even shared with me some spirit encounter stories. I had a great time talking to Mel, and I hope you have a great time listening. So without further ado, let's fly. Mel Priestley, welcome to Nightbird Radio. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you on. Real quick, did you want to tell people where they could find you?
Sure, yeah. Best place to find me is my website, melpriestley.ca.
And you offer readings?
I do, yeah. So you'll find a lot of posts on astrology. And if you dig down deep enough, you will find some wine and food and some random other things in there, but mostly just a lot of astrology these days. And I do also offer astrology consultations as well. So you'll be able to book through there.
Very cool. So, how are you staying sane in an insane age?
Yeah. How am I? Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm not. That's a good question. Becoming an astrologer was part of my staying sane in an insane age, actually. So, and I mean that like a professional astrologer, I guess. So in the sense of I'm, doing readings for people. Yeah. So that was something it had to happen. And it was early 2020, right before the pandemic hit, actually. And I just kind of it sounds so cheesy. I wish I had like a better sort of initial incident, but I didn't. It just one day I woke up and I thought, I think I need to be an astrologer now. And I had always been interested in it. It was something I had been into for a long time, just like a lot of people, I think, who are into astrology or even into anything esoteric. Like astrology is always kind of there. And it's arguably one of the most, if not the most public forms of, I guess I'll say like esoterica out there. There's always horoscopes in the paper. It's often people's gateway to sort of thinking about things in a maybe a little bit more of a magical way. So yeah, but then I just had this realization, I guess, and it was nothing big, nothing major, no fireworks, no massive initiatory experience. I was just like, I think this is my life now. And so I did that.
Nice. What were you afraid of as a child?
Like lots of things like kids are afraid of, for sure, but there was one incident that stands out for me. It was a summer when I was probably about 13, and I think I was afraid of my own mortality. I was facing, just simple things, just facing my own mortality. I got super freaked out to go to sleep because I started thinking, if I go to sleep, well, you don't know you're sleeping until you wake up. When you're sleeping, you're just sleeping. And if you never wake up from your sleep, well, then how do you know you're dead? It sounds like a really stoned thought, actually, although I was definitely not stoned at the time. I was too young for that. But yeah, I just got so wrapped up in this idea of not wanting to fall asleep because of all of that. And so I would just stay up until I literally passed out because I was exhausted. And so it was in the summer, so I didn't have to go to school. So it kind of worked out. I didn't have to get up, in 2 hours or whatever. So I could just do the teenager thing and sleep until like 2-3 p.m. But yeah, that really stands out. And then I guess it just faded. I don't know. Like I just kind of came to terms with my mortality, or I guess I was just like, well, there is nothing I can do about this now. But yeah, that stands out as like, for whatever reason, I got super neurotic and paranoid about falling asleep that summer.
That's interesting. Because I used to want to go to sleep so bad, but I couldn't sleep because I couldn't stop thinking about other things, just like everything. I guess I was on a lot of medication too.
Mm, yeah,
That didn't
that's
really
probably
help.
no, that's not going to help. Yeah.
So you said that kind of just faded over time. There wasn't a particular experience that happened that kind of brought that about. It was just sort of gradual.
Yeah, again, I feel like when I look back on my life and I think back to like the major points, there's often not an not an incident I can point to say like that was the thing. It's just
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like a switch was turned and I just was that way now. So yeah, maybe I'm just not remembering. Maybe I like have some weird buried things, could be,
Could be.
but yeah.
What about experiences that sort of exposed you to a world beyond the scene or a paranormal or whatever you'd want to call it? Was that
Mhm.
always something that was a part of your life or
Pretty much. So, I mean, I was a big reader from the time I was extremely young. And so I started reading things from a young age that I shouldn't, that my parents had. They didn't censor me, which was great. So I just free access to the library. I was reading Stephen King books when I was like 12, which is like not, that kind of coincided maybe with that summer. Actually, I was probably reading too much Stephen King or something. It's like fucked up shit that I was like, ooh, maybe I didn't want to fall asleep because of that. But yeah, so I think when you're like a big reader, you're always sort of in a fantasy world of sorts, and fantasy was also one of the genres, sci-fi and fantasy, that I was super into. So yeah, it was more of so I was always interested in reading about magic, so the fairy tales and the fantasy type novels, and then that was around like the 90s. It was when I was a teenager, and so the Wicca movement was like going strong there, and so then it was just kind of a natural jump to, oh well, is there real magic, like what does that look like, right? And so then I started reading all of those books and getting interested in that, and yeah, so I was always interested in, and I always knew, I was like, oh, magic is real. Here it is in these books, and it was like the 90s Wicca girl version of that. But hey, we all got to start somewhere, right? And I mean that there's always like a section on astrology in most of those books, which I had always loved the night sky and planets and things as a nerdy little kid. And then when I realized and found horoscopes and notes about astrology, and I was like, well, wait, they actually mean something. They're actually magical, and then that was amazing. And, it was just kind of off to the races from there.
yeah, that's interesting because you had mentioned that it's a lot of the times people's gateway into things. So for me, I feel like astrology was like that first domino. Like spirits, for some reason, were like and magic weren't difficult for me to grasp. I think those were things that for like a long time I wanted to be real,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
I was denying their reality because of bad experiences with the church and things like that.
Yeah.
But astrology was one of those things where I was like, yeah, that's bullshit. Like that's total bullshit.
Hmm.
Along with like crystals and what else, what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and so astrology. Once I think it was when I looked both at my chart and then like an ex's chart and was like, oh shit,
Hmm.
this is like to the T. And because you get the horoscopes in the newspapers that are just like
So
pretty
generic.
so
And
generic,
so,
right?
yeah. Yeah. Sun sign astrology. I like saying it doesn't do anyone any favors, but it does. Like it's often that gateway for people. But the quality of that form of astrology is just, it's, see, I'm going to be insulting so many people by saying this, and I don't mean it that way, because I think that the sun sign astrologers out there have done great for the astrology community and kind of kept it going. But at the same time, they did reduce it to like this really sort of easily ridiculed form of astrology, and one that's really not. That's like it's like 5% of the whole story of astrology. So yeah, so I have mixed feelings about it. I don't want to trash talk it because
No, we're
again,
not going to trash talk it. It just was.
yeah,
It would just made it easy for me to dismiss. Like.
totally. Yeah.
But then even then, well, they're all different. And I don't know why that was a big deal to me. It's like, okay, show me something that someone can't just look at and say, oh, yeah, that's me. Because and then, I mean, there's plenty of that in astrology if you actually look. I just wasn't looking. I also fuck with crystals too. You know what I mean? Like, so like I said, it was like, it was like that first domino. And once that fell, it's like, everything was coming over the wall with it, My experience of my Saturn return is like just plainly in my chart, like it was a bad marriage and I have Saturn in the 7th house.
Same.
Oh yeah, right. So and I got married like right before that, and so like after all this happened and I was kind of in the wreckage of that, looking at that was like, oh shit. This just told me if I would have like looked at this before, you can't woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I would have known what was going to happen,
Well, right, but would you still have denied yourself that? I mean,
no, I would have done it.
Yeah. Anyway. I mean, that's the age old. Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm like, well, fuck the stars. What do they know? Right. What does Saturn know? I'm not going to let that guy tell me what to do. Yeah.
I have often been caught saying, yeah, fuck the planets. I'm going to free myself from astral determinacy.
Right. And oh man, there's so much of that. Like the more I feel like I feel like I'm becoming more stoic as time goes on. And I'm like, wow, in another 20 years, am I just going to be full on like our fates are not our own and our destiny is control? I don't think so, because then that kind of goes against my fundamental beliefs in magic and things like that, right? Where, look, what's the point of doing magic if you can't change anything? Like if everything's predetermined and fated to happen, and if we could deduce that from looking at a chart or whatever it might be, then what's the point, right? So no, I still think there is still human agency to wiggle around. But there's no getting around like a Saturn return, for example, right? There's going to be lessons. And so Saturn's got lessons for you, right? And so in whatever form that takes, and you can certainly do magic I guess you could do magic to save a marriage. Although I think my first question would be like, is it worth saving? Is it actually, right?
Right. And like, yeah, like how much thought went into it. And in my case, I mean, not a lot. Right.
Mm-hmm. Hey.
It was just like, hey, let's do it. Right. And it's funny. So that was a question I was going to ask, was what came first, astrology or magic? So it's cool hearing that you only got into that recently. So when you first started out, when you said you were doing the Wicca kind of stuff, were you doing that in groups? Did you have magic friends?
No, man, I wanted them so bad, but I was pretty shy and nerdy, and it was a side of myself that I kept quite hidden, even from like my best friend at the time. So I totally, the craft came out and I was like, I want to do that, even though obviously that, doesn't go well for anyone. Well, I guess the main chick it goes okay for, but anyway, but no, I was too embarrassed by it. So I just kept it hidden and just did little, teenage Wicca girl stuff. And not even a ton of it. Right. But I was still kind of dabbling and very earth-based. Like I was always super fascinated by herbs and plants and things like that. So I tended to go at it from like more of an herbalism perspective, which is more like legit, right? So I would, do some herb experiments and things like that. And, I would make herbals like dry flowers and press them and then write all of the like magical meanings and uses and things for them and create my own little like, books like that, which was
compendium sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I never shared that with anyone. I actually had like recently, like embarrassingly recent it was like 2016. So how long ago is that? But my gosh, like, a few years, but not that long ago.
It feels like longer ago than it was.
Yes. Time.
It feels like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Time has shifted. And when you start doing astrology, time gets really weird. Like when I start looking at charts, I remember who some astrologer I was listening to was talking about like, looking back in time and then having like, through astrology charts. And then, if you're examining like the Mercury retrograde periods for the year upcoming or behind or whatever. And then you have like Mercury retrograde stuff like happen while you're doing that. And then as soon as you stop doing that work, it stops. That's a thing that totally happens. But anyway, yeah, no, in 2016, I went and I got my group Wicca experience out of the way with like I found the local group, and I was like a full on adult by then, right? And I was like, okay, I can do this now. I'm not a nerdy teenager. I'm going to go and do it. And it was exactly as bad as you'd think it was. Maybe it was better in the 90s. I would have been a teenager, so it would have been better and worse in some ways. So that didn't last long, but I feel like I got it out of my system. But unfortunately, that did make me really sad for the state of doing magical workings in groups. And I know it's not always like that at all. I mean, that was actually the year I found Rune Soup, and then also shortly after found the Quareia through Rune Soup, actually. So I started doing Josephine McCarthy's Quareia courses and getting like an actual sort of more proper foundation in magical practice and things like that. So yeah, that's actually really where things kind of took off. So it was kind of funny that I had this like little diversion into Wicca. And previous to that, I mean, from like teenagehood to then, I would like dabble in things here and there, but nothing ever stuck until that point. And then it was really like, okay. And that's when I did start studying astrology more seriously. Although when I started studying astrology, it's funny. I don't know if you've experienced this. When you stare at a chart and you're staring at it really intently, do you ever get like almost like a sick, spinning, dizzy type feeling? Like you feel gross, like you're staring into the void?
Yeah, I feel like that every time I try to look at astrology because I feel dumb as shit when I do it.
Well, like I get that. I used to feel that all the time. It was like there was knowledge there, so much knowledge, all of the knowledge,
So much.
right. And if I could just decode it, but it wasn't until early 2020, like I said, when I had that moment of being like, I think I become an astrologer now. Up until that point, if I looked at a chart for more than like a couple minutes, I would get that sort of dizzy, gross feeling. And so I just have to back off, and I wasn't able to like really get into it. And then from that point on, when I realized I was able to like really look into charts and really go deep, and started studying very intently. And I've never had that feeling since. So yeah, so it was like really like a switch. And I mean, it coincided actually very strongly with that major the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that happened in January 2020. That happened with like less than a degree from my midheaven. So, gonna chalk that one up there is definitely a major pivotal moment in my life for sure. And I saw it there, like it was, and I didn't notice it at the time. I think I looked it up and I was like, ooh, that's big. It's happening right on my midheaven. I wonder what could happen. And then, like the end of that year, I was like, enrolled in astrology courses, and I was like full on like doing it. So yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's interesting hearing about that experience, because it's like you're looking at the chart, and when you're looking at the chart, you are gazing into like a moment in space, in time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the ability for you to kind of come into deeper relation to that and understand it a little bit more kind of made that vertigo go away, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was maybe that I needed to sort of be initiated or accepted by the planets, maybe. Like I kind of felt like they were like, okay, you can be in the club now. Like you can do this. But prior to that, they were kind of like, nah, get out of here, kid. You're not ready or whatever, right? So
that's cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a good segue to jump into talking about building those relationships with the planets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of that astrological spirit work that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, if I think back, what's the best way to build relationships with planets? Look up. Look at them, look up at the sky. And the easiest way to do that is, just becoming more aware, I think, of of sky country, of the sky above you, and acknowledging that as what it is this, well, like literally living cosmos around us, full of all these other amazing beings. And I'd always been doing that as a kid. I just didn't, I hadn't quite, it hadn't become fully haunted, because when you read astronomy texts, oh my God, they make this amazing thing so fucking boring. And I'm
So
just like,
boring.
so boring, right? It's all this
Like, this is
math.
gas.
It's, yeah, look at this ball of gas, and I'm just like, geez, like,
It's like, yo,
you,
motherfuckers are really telling me this thing is an explosion. Like, come on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's so sad what materialism has done to it, right? But it's whatever, you can get it back, right? And all you have to do is just kind of like put all that aside and look up at the night sky, look at the moon, when it's full or when it's even not full, and just really look at that, and yeah, and vibe it out. But I mean, so from that moment, kind of just over a few years ago, when I started going deep into this, I mean, I was reading like crazy about it, but I was also just constantly, tracking the moon's movements like every day. Like I would go out and see if I could see it, and you can't always see it, but yeah, and just try to becoming aware of it on, I guess, that physical level, right? Of like, what do I see when I look up at the night sky from this vantage point in a city? So, not a lot, but still much more than you think. And then also to just figuring out ways to engage with the planets on a, I guess, a more spiritual level. So I mean, that fed into developing a daily devotional practice, which I still maintain, and it's like a reflex now. Like, and I keep it very simple. Like I ritualize it because I like the ritual. Like it's good. It's a good way to start the day. Ideally, you do these things at sunrise so that it's in, like the hour of the daily planet, and I just, recite some prayers in the Orphic hymn to whatever planetary deity is, of the day, right? So today is Thursday, so it's Jupiter Day. But I don't always do it right at sunrise, because I live in northern Canada, and sunrise right now in the summer is like 5:40 something a.m. Sorry. I'm not getting up that early. I'm sorry. I'm just not. So I'm actually not that much of a stickler for not for the daily devotional work, for getting it like in the exact hour and stuff. For if I'm doing like magical work, I will, but I don't do actually a ton of that. I focus, my practice is right now more focused on devotional stuff every day, and then reading charts for people, and then just doing some reading and constant research and things like that. So yeah, I love the Rune Soup community, because there's like, those guys are all in with like, making talismans and stuff. And maybe I'll get there, but for whatever reason, I do not feel drawn that way in my astro practice yet.
So you feel that the devotional practice has helped you in your learning astrology too, right? Like,
Oh yeah, 100%. I really question, so there's so many astrologers these days, right? Like astrology has just blown up over the last, I guess, decade, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less. Doesn't matter. So if you go onto social media, like the astrologers of Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and it's just inundated, and there's been so many new people coming in, which is great in some ways. It makes me nervous in others. We don't have to get into all of the politics of what the hell is going on in the astro community. I'm quite critical of a lot of it, because for people who claim to, well, for people who are operating in this space of, how do I even describe it? Like you're doing magic when you are interpreting a chart, really. Or it is adjacent anyway. It's like this magical practice, but so many of them strike me as like hardcore materialists. And you can see it by all the other shit they post, especially over the pandemic. The hot takes I've seen coming out of astrologers' mouths, and I'm like, it's such cognitive dissonance for me personally, because I'm like, wow, I guess this is what happens if you like materialize astrology. I don't know. So that's a whole big rabbit hole we don't have to necessarily get into. But for me, it was like, of course, I'm going to do daily devotionals to the planets, because I'm working with these gods, for lack of a better word, and I should be polite for starters, and also develop a good working relationship with them, so that they'll talk to me through the charts of my clients, or through any other chart I happen to be looking at.
Yeah, that's interesting about the downstream effects of materializing astrology, because it seems to like you predict something and they think that it's like, oh, well, you want that to happen or something. Well, it's like, no, you just
Mm,
predicted it, right?
hmm. Right, right. Yeah. Yes. And of course, we all have our own biases and stuff, and that's very obvious when you read people's predictions, right? Like you can tell someone's politics like quite clearly by what they write about it. And I guess that's in many respects it's natural. But I think that if you're doing any kind of divinatory work, being aware of your own perspective and blinders as much as you possibly can is like gonna make you a better reader,
So
obviously,
what does that
because.
look like for you?
Mhm. So yeah, I mean, like I have my own opinions about
Sure.
everything out there. I do try to be as objective as possible, but I know I'm not, right. Like I just I'm not, because I can't be. No one can be. So I guess what it means is I just try to I I, I acknowledge how I would read that. And then I do flip it as like, okay, well, like what if I didn't have this perspective, right? And because I'm Canadian, there's lots of stuff happening in Canada, like not great stuff, especially over the pandemic, and how restrictive our country's gone, and how like they're violating our rights left, right, and
Yeah, like
center,
straight up
and
totalitarianism. Yeah.
yeah, but it's soft, polite Canadian totalitarianism. So people are just like going along with it, like because they just don't want to deal. So now this train of thought's getting away from myself. So I don't know. I guess I just try to be aware of it as much as possible. And also I guess toe the line. I'm not afraid to like say things, but I also don't. I try not to get on like a political grandstand. I guess when I'm posting about like
Right.
if I do like my forecast posts for pardon me, for Canada coming up, and I was on a panel actually earlier this year with OPA, which is an organization, the Organization for Professional Astrologers, and yeah, it was the Canadian chapter, and I was one of the panelists talking about like upcoming predictions for Canada. And I think I was definitely probably the darkest in terms of highlighting, like the totalitarianism, right? Like the censorship and the hardcore, all of that stuff. So, but I did try to tone it down a little bit because I was aware that many people in my audience might not be there yet. And if you haven't, if you're just starting to realize, wait a second, what our government has done over the last 2 years is like so completely unacceptable and beyond the pale. Like if you're just kind of coming to that now, it's going to be difficult. Like I've already gone through some serious dark nights of the soul over the last 2 years, and I'm trying to be aware that like so many people haven't yet, and I should just try to be there and support them. And so the clients who come and see me, I can usually gauge pretty quick where they're at on that path. And a lot of the people who have found me they're kind of on that path already, which I think just makes sense. You attract the clients who, I mean, every night I pray to attract the clients that I would serve best. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I feel like I'm not in any way the same person I was 2 years ago. Like, I mean, it kind of always is like that, but this has been
Mhm.
like overdrive,
Yeah. Oh, for
you
sure. I
know?
don't I don't know if anyone can really say they are. I mean, I guess maybe you could. I
Sure.
don't know. Everyone I'd talk to was like, yeah, holy shit, about the same.
Yeah, and I think it comes with a lot of work, and it's like just not doing that work doesn't mean like you won't have to. Like I that doesn't make sense, but like that shit piles up,
Yes.
you know?
And you see it, like if we're gonna go with the astrology, take, you'll see it in people's charts in various ways, right? Like where your baggage is, or where your struggles are. And I hope when people come to astrology, seriously, like if they're gonna, get into this and want a professional reading, or even just um, reading the blogs and stuff like that. Like you can go as fluffy, light astrology meme as you want. And don't get me wrong, I love a good astrology meme. But for me, like this is, I mean, this is a spiritual practice as much as it is something I'm doing as like I guess a a job, like a freelance gig, right, on the side. But this is a spiritual practice. This is a fundamental cornerstone of my spirituality right now. And so I have a lot more respect for it. And so I just always kind of am amused slash bemused when people start really shit talking the planets in particular. And look, like Saturn's easy to shit talk because he's no fun. But I'm always a little bit like, okay, we should stop now because like, I don't want to piss off Saturn. Like,
Right.
like we could shit talk respectfully.
Well, I think that speaks to how people. Okay, so this is the way I see it, and I'm just lucky to have been probably shown this by people. I doubt I came up with this, but like, okay, so there's some things that might be fate, that might be inevitable, but how I'm going to deal with those things, that's what is under my control, right? So I may have these energies that are expressing themselves based on things that are in my chart. I can choose to not do anything, or to express those energies maybe unskillfully, or I can kind of transmute those energies in the most skillful way that I can. And that's, to me, where it's a spiritual practice, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, you can look, like, I can look at my chart and say like, oh, I'm fucked in relationships.
Sure.
But well, I mean, no, it just takes maybe looking at it with a different set of glasses and putting in work to find, okay, maybe it's going to be difficult to me to have the type of relationship that is shown like as accepted in our society, or like in a movie, or like that fairy tale thing. It's going to maybe be something that I have to do a little differently, or fight a little differently for. Right. So if I'm viewing it as this limitation or as this curse, then I'm actually cursing myself, because what it really is like a chance to transmute the energy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like, why do people get astrology readings, right? Well, I mean, it's because we're trying to understand ourselves, deeper, and then hopefully in the hopes to overcome, the challenges we get ourselves into, or that we're faced with, often of our own making, right? And so once you start to see, it's wonderful for recognizing patterns, right? Like, it will be right there in your chart, and you can look at the placements and the aspects and go, okay, so you tend to do da 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 da, and you tend to attract da 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 da. And so once you're aware of that, that's half the battle. I always say this, right? Like, knowing is half the battle, and the other half is do something about it. And I'm sure there are some people who, they'll go through this process and they'll get their chart read, and then they just keep making the same mistakes, and that's it. It's frustrating, obviously, but it's worth trying, I guess, especially if you're unhappy with the way things are going, or with the way things have gone. So, I mean, just taking the relationship one, yeah, you can look at your chart. Like, I have a Saturn-Mars conjunction in Scorpio in the 7th house, which is like garbage for relationships on the surface, right? Well, I got married early and I'm still married. Like, I got married when I was 22 and I'm 38 now. I'm still married. So, you're not doomed to have a shitty, horrible, loveless life just because you have like a bad aspect there, right? Now, has it always been like perfect? No, obviously not, but no relationship is. So yeah, like it's you need to learn the way you act in these different areas of your life, which your astrology chart can tell you like very clearly. And then you can choose to do or not do stuff about it. And you'll still fall into the same traps, because it does describe things that you'll tend to get into. And when you see the transits coming up, or using other timing techniques, things pile up in one area, and you go, ooh, that's going to be real tough for whatever. But that if you know that going in, then you can make potentially different choices. You can also choose to just let it go. That is also valid. Sometimes, like, we don't always have to intervene. And to the fate part of it, sometimes, but again, it's like the classic matrix situation, right? Like, if you had not done anything or known anything, would you still be in the same situation? Or knowing it made you end up here, right? So it's
I think there's a good deal of medicine to the idea that of just things being okay, like this is just a time where this happens. So like maybe this sucks right now, but I feel like astrology a lot of the time helps me to realize that like yeah, it just sucks now though. Like it's not always going to be that way, and it could be on a big arc. You know what I mean? But it
Hmm.
helps me to see the temporary nature of some of these problems, or and the impermanence,
100%.
right?
The great thing about it is it's like no transit lasts forever. Everything will change. This is a good time to talk about it because we're actually headed to one of the you know, most not fun transits of 2022,
Oh yeah,
which
let's
is
talk about it.
yeah, it's on August 1st. It's the Mars Uranus North Node conjunction in Taurus. It's at 18 Taurus. Yeah, and it goes exact on August 1st. But it has been ramping up because, of course, Uranus and the North Node move pretty slow. So they've been conjoined on 18 Taurus for a while now. And Mars is kind of full speed ahead, charging towards them. So I have definitely noticed my ascendant is at 22 Taurus. So yeah, I have definitely noticed.
My
My
moon is at like 16,
my
and in the 12th
sister's.
house.
Oh, ooh, has that been unfun for you?
So Taurus has like gone back and forth over my moon like 3 times in the past 2 years. Or
Uranus
sorry,
moon?
Taurus. Uranus has
Yeah,
gone. Did I say
yeah,
Taurus?
yes, it's all
Uranus has
good.
been dancing on my moon
Yes,
in Taurus.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I've changed habitation situations quite a bit.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And have you just been feeling like very unmoored, like just unstable, like crazy?
Yeah, but it's actually like kind of nice because I'm in a good place to deal with that. Like,
Yeah,
whereas before, who knows what that might have been? Like,
right.
like I got sober, so
Yeah,
as crazy as it might be, like it really almost can't be as crazy as it was
right. Like if you had
before
gone,
of my
yeah,
own
like
making.
if you had gone through that before you did get sober, like this, I just conjecturing, but that it could have gone very badly, like very
Explosions.
badly.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so enough about me. Continue. You were talking about yeah.
Oh, yes, right. So just like so that's one of the like hairiest transits of the year, right? And so I've had a lot of people reaching out, kind of freaking out and being like, what do I do? Like, and one of the best things I think it's in this one in particular, like my keyword for it is explosive liberation. Like, Mars brings the explosions and Uranus just wants the liberation. And so there can be a lot of power in that for good and for just for progress and movement and growth. And I think writing it out is just kind of one of the, that's one of those ones when you get into the outer planets and talking about remediation and stuff, like there's very clear ways to sort of remediate, Mars or just work. I like working with like, as opposed to remediate, like working with the energy. So if you've got a big Mars thing going on, we know what Mars likes, right? I mean, he likes violence. So find a constructive way to do violence. He likes to burn shit.
Right.
Well, maybe like literally, go burn shit. We don't burn a building down, but you could like literally just go and burn things probably.
Yeah,
And
like in
find
a
it.
controlled
Yeah.
manner, right? Like
Yeah. Right.
go find a friend who has land in the country and like set a couch on fire
Sure.
while shooting it with a gun. Like that's great Mars remediation.
I
Or
like
like
this.
even
Yeah.
just like a martial art or a workout plan,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
I
A
guess
lot of
those
people
are
do. So for me, I'm a lazy Taurus rising. So I always recommend people, I'm like, you can totally do some like workout to like get around the Mars. Well, in my head, I'm like, ugh, I don't want to do that. Kind of sit on my ass. So, I mean, also knowing where you're coming from, right? So like, yeah. But with Uranus, when you get into the outer planets, I don't know how you work with them so much because those are forces I think we're still really new to learning about from both an astronomical and astrological perspective. The ancient astrologers, well, they might have known they were there. I've always wondered about this, like
Mm,
especially Uranus, because you can technically see it with the naked eye from like very rare, but you can technically see it from Earth if you're in like an incredibly dark landscape and you know exactly where to look. You can see it. Also, do we not think that some of the ancients, well, they had telescope type things, right? So anyway, so this is just me
yeah.
rambling about like
No,
I think
I'm totally
yeah,
into that kind of thing. I think that that they had all kinds of technology that we're not, that the mainstream isn't willing to admit.
Hmm. And I mean, this is also something like when we look at the ancient astrology texts that are from like the Hellenistic period, right? Like there is no mention of the outer planet there. So we assume they didn't know about them or they didn't write about them or whatever, right?
Sure, but like
that's
what? We don't have any writings from Atlantis.
from before. Exactly. Yeah.
If
Right. Like who knows what,
you're even into that, which I am.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. The Atlantean astrologers were probably
Yeah.
all up on that.
The Lemurians, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. So where was I going with that? Anyway, this isn't very helpful, I know, to people who are like worried about this transit or any major outer planet transits. But I do think there is not a lot we can do with those necessarily. The inner planets, and by that I mean anything from Saturn inwards. There is a lot because it's documented for thousands of years of things you can do to work with those specific energies. And also humans have had a relationship with those spirits for also thousands of years. So I think even just doing like daily prayers to them can help, right? Like you're at least tuning into that so you can kind of get a sense for what it might feel like. And then hopefully also if you're making some nice offerings and saying some nice words, they'll maybe look a little bit more kindly upon you too, right?
So where does and it's the North Node too in that?
Yeah, North Node is
so
right.
What energy does that bring to the whole deal, right?
Boy, have I gotten a lesson in what the nodal axis means this year. So if you for a while I kind of subscribed to the more modern psychological approach to the nodes. And so it's like the North Node was your like your I'm gonna get this wrong because I don't think of it this way anymore. Your North Node was like your dharma, like what you should be going towards in this life, and your south node is your karma from past lives. And so it's a lot of people use that sort of thing, and it works well for them. I tend to think of it as like the north. They're destabilizing points for starters. So just general instability. And so when you pair up Uranus with it, which is also like very unstable, you get like more unstableness. But the ancient astrologers thought of the North Node as more of like an increasing effect. And then the South Node is like a decreasing effect. And the Indian astrologers, like in Jyotish or Vedic astrology, the North Node is Rahu, the head of the dragon, and the South Node is Ketu, the tail of the dragon. So the North Node, so that's where Uranus and Mars are hanging out right now. The head of the dragon consumes, right? That's all it does. It's headless. All it does is intake and intake and intake. So it's the spot of like increase and intake, which it's not always a good thing, right? Like
it just amplifies.
Exactly. Like it gives this increasing effect on whatever's near it. So when Mars and Uranus are near it, it's just amplifying Uranus and Mars, right? And then the South Node decreases. So the South Node is actually considered better for the malefics. Like if Mars was on the South Node, it would actually be better.
I got you.
Than on the North, because North Node like increases Mars, South Node like actually decreases it. So it makes him a little more tame, I guess, right? So yeah. So it's like a megaphone, basically on top of those two.
Yeah. Interesting. And that's for any listeners that don't know, because I my grasp is sure tenuous.
Yeah. So the nodal axis. So okay. So just basic astronomy, right? People can't see me like waving my hands around, so just picture me waving my hands around because I do that a lot. Basically, the sun looks like it moves around the Earth, right? Like, yes, we live in a heliocentric world, but we don't experience it that way. It looks like the sun moves around us. So the sun moves around the Earth, and there's a band that we can draw around the Earth of the sun's like path, right? And that's called the ecliptic. And the moon also goes around the Earth, and it also has a band. So the point at which the sun and the moon's paths cross on either side of the planet are the nodes. They're always exactly opposite each other. So yeah, and that's where eclipses occur, right? Because we know that when the sun and the moon's paths cross, then you get a solar or a lunar eclipse depending on the phase of the moon. So yeah, so that's in a nutshell. Start over. So in a nutshell, that is what the nodes are. They're a point. They're not a body or a planet or anything, but they're a critical point. And they are very important in your chart, and then also in the transits, obviously, right? Because they signal where the eclipses are going to be that year. And so this year, of course, the eclipses are across Taurus and Scorpio, and so it's just amplifying that area again and highlighting it and shaking up everything going on with that axis. So wherever that falls in your chart, everything's kind of getting all shaken right up.
Very cool.
So we definitely got on like some astrology tangents. I'm trying to think. I feel like there was something else I wanted to share about that.
Take a second, you're fine.
Well, do you have any?
It'll come back. I wanted to know about magical chickpeas.
Oh, yeah. I made magical chickpeas recently. They were great. Yeah. So in the Picatrix, there is a little recipe for magical chickpeas, and this is the kind of magic that I love doing. So I've always been drawn to, like I mentioned earlier, like to herbalism and working with plant spirits and stuff. And I've actually been making some herbal tinctures this year, which I'm vibing with very much. I really like them. And so yeah, so I've been playing with those. I'm gonna try to find the recipe here so I can read it to you because it's very short and simple. But yeah, so it was actually a fellow rune super who I didn't ask if I could say their name, so I won't. But they mentioned this recipe in the Picatrix for magical chickpeas. And again, I love kitchen witch type stuff, so I was like, I am going to make those. So basically, you take chickpeas, like just a bowl of dry chickpeas, and you stick them out under the light of the waxing moon, and you leave them in the light for just a night. And then you wake up before dawn and you anoint them with oil, and then you soak them in water for a couple hours, and then you cook them, and then you eat them, and they are supposed to dispel melancholy. So they're like happy magical chickpeas.
That sounds fantastic.
Right. I was like, why wouldn't I try that? That sounds great. I want happy chickpeas.
So this is kind of blowing my mind a little bit because I'm a cook. I'm a cook by trade.
Oh, cool.
And I never even thought
put your chickpeas under the moon.
Well, yeah, I never really thought about treating the ingredients like materia. And I don't know why, but I'm glad that you're telling me this right now because I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah.
That's like opening up a new dimension.
Yeah. Okay, here I found the exact recipe. So it says, yeah, so there's the recipe. From all those, okay, sorry, let me start over. From all those to whom you give these to eat, all sorrow, ill will, evil thoughts, and every kind of melancholy will depart, and their hearts will rejoice in the highest virtue, and they will become alert and joyful in all things. Sounds great. And you know what? I made them. I made a soup with them, and I ate it, and I felt happy. Now, I have to say, I wasn't like super sad or melancholic before, so my baseline level of sadness was pretty low. So I have actually, the moon is what actually it was new today. So I'm going to make another batch of these because I have some people in my life who could stand to have some happy magical chickpeas right now. So yes. Yeah, but no, you can absolutely treat food as materia. And I think that's like that's what we probably should do that every day. I mean, I think saying prayers of gratitude, like grace or however you want to do it before you eat is a good practice, but
totally. And I think that's like hopefully that's a way in for some people, right? Like, okay, when you pray over your food, that's exactly what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But there's more possibilities. So what other tell me more about kitchen witchery. What other kind of things do you like to do with that? Or
sure.
Are there any other type of recipes or things that pop in your mind?
Yeah, the one that I know a bunch of people have tried in rune soup are Hildegard's biscuits or cookies, right?
I want to try these.
Yeah, me too. And I know a few people who have. They are like, I think they're probably mildly psychoactive. I mean, I looked at the ingredients list and
it's like a bunch of nutmeg
and cinnamon, yeah, which do have psychoactive properties. So
yeah. I
was like, oh yeah, like that's a shit ton of nutmeg. You probably would like. I think you should probably only eat one, maybe two, because I feel like you might actually, if you could probably overdo it and probably end up feeling kind of sick after. So
yeah, I've heard that the nutmeg thing is really like, it can be kind of unpleasant, but I wondered if maybe some of the other ingredients might mitigate, you know what I mean? And if it's in the form of a cookie, right? Because I think one of the things that people get wrong with any sort of psychoactive substance is like isolating it out.
Yep.
Right. So like, this is why you have things like crack, like for real though. Because like, you know, the way that indigenous people did it was they would chew the leaves.
Yeah.
And that's like
Yeah.
that's a totally different type of in relation with the plant, as opposed to like extracting, weaponizing, actually colonizing that plant and extracting a resource from it. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and treating it as, I mean, this goes into the whole landscape of medicine and whatnot. But I mean, this is why um, herbalism is so valuable. And I'm not an herbalist by any means. Like I use it mainly for magical purposes, but of course I eat food. So I would say we're all kind of herbalists if you're eating veggies anyway, I suppose. But yeah, like it's that idea of, oh, there has to be just one molecule in this substance which is doing the thing that we want it to do. And that's why herbal studies, time and again, they're just so stupid. They like extract whatever they think is the active molecule, and then they like create a synthetic version, or they just, create a concentrated version of that and inject it into lab rats. And then they're like, it gave them cancer. And I'm like, really? No shit.
right.
Like, that's not how you're supposed to take that medicine. That's not how that herb is meant to be, ingested. So yeah, it's just a broken way of looking at the world, right? And,
right. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Like if you, and I think I said this in the episode with DB, like if I'm a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm on a war footing with the microscopic world, like, germs and everything's
Germ
out
warfare.
to get you. Yeah, right. Germ warfare, right. Immune system.
Mm-hmm.
If I see everything like that, then I just want to pew pew at it instead of kind of coming to a more nuanced view of what's happening, or a more nuanced view of disease in general. We're just like making weapons to blast at stuff. Yeah. And that's what's going to happen if I look at it in a war mindset.
And how has that worked out for humanity?
Right.
Right? Like,
yeah, we're doing great.
Yeah, we're awesome. Yeah, so good. But we are. I do actually do. I'm trying to have the optimism. Like we really are. Like there is so much amazing stuff going on. It's really easy to just be like, everything's fucked, and it is. But
yeah, that's
and just
falling into the psyop too.
Exactly. Like just despair and giving up. Oh, 100%. You're super easy to control if you give up and just go about your life as like a little shadow of yourself. Sure. But yeah, no. So I mean, just kitchen witchery, and I don't do anything super hardcore. But I mean, when I'm making food, I'll, especially, so I love making soups, and that's very witchy, right? Like standing over this big bubbling cauldron of whatever it might be, and if you've made your chickpeas magical before you put them in. Side note, I'm gonna experiment with this more with other. I think chickpeas are probably lunar, or at least that was certainly what whoever did that recipe clearly thought that they look were ruled like by the moon. Yeah,
little moons.
They do, right? So it's very easy to tell like which some foods anyway, which foods would be governed by like which planetary deity. And there's lots of lists of correspondences and tables that you can find for this sort of thing. But I think putting lunar foods, and it makes sense that you put it under a waxing moon, obviously, right? Because you want to pull those abundance and growth vibes. But similarly, well, I was thinking with the magical chickpeas, it's like, geez, so if the waxing moon makes the chickpeas happy and dispels melancholy, if I put them under the waning moon, could I make like depression chickpeas? I'm like, I'm not going to try it. I'm like kind of tempted. I'm not going to lie, but I'm not going to try it because
that's some interesting Malefica right there.
Right. Like, I don't want to like make myself or other people depressed by making like sad soup. So I'm not going to do that. But I feel like the
taste of my sad soup.
Yes. All joy shall depart from you. Yeah, no, I'm not going to lie. There's a part of me that wants to try it, but I'll save that for someone if they really,
Well,
that's my version of Malefica.
You could try it as a means of testing the happy chickpeas, right? So like if you needed to get to a state of sadness, you could, this is a terrible idea, but
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, now you're just talking like big pharma here. I'm not doing any of this. But yeah, I think you could totally probably do some little ritual blessings or putting them, like the moon is one of the easiest to work with. We're going to talk about like planetary work because it's right there. You can see it. So you can when the moon is full and it's just so commanding, you can put stuff out and it's light, and we have a long history of doing this, obviously. So I think you could go a long way with that. But also
Yeah,
just
if you can charge your crystals there, why can't you charge your chickpeas? That's
totally
good.
right.
Makes good sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, also just saying prayers or whispering spells or whatever over your things that you're cooking and adding ingredients.
This is interesting. I have this idea that, and I think it's probably not uncommon among magical circles, because intention is so important to magic, right? And I really sometimes wonder, like, okay, so you went out to eat at a restaurant and like the food just didn't sit right with you.
I'm so glad you said. I was literally,
okay,
I was going to say this. This has happened to us all the time. Like, we'll eat stuff and then you're like, oh, I think the chefs are really like not in a good place, because
like that transfers into it. So because I remember, being a cook, there have been times where I'm just like breathing nothing but malice and hatred into those things that I'm creating, and they might look beautiful, but my intentions when I was making them was just like misery. You know what I mean? And so I just wonder how often that transfers. Oh,
it does. I would say it transfers, pardon me, in every time.
I would say like much more than some sort of a foodborne pathogen, to be honest.
Oh, easily. Yeah. And it's something that people just don't even think about. But yeah, if with varying levels of sensitivity, I think too, right? But yeah, how many tummy aches do you have because not because the food was a little off or whatever, but because the person who made it was in a really bad place and was thinking a lot of really nasty thoughts while they were making your hamburger or whatever.
Right. And then like put seed oils on top of that. And it's
sure. Right. There's also the quality of the ingredients getting ever worse. Right. So on top of all the shit ingredients, you've got like shit vibes going into them. So of course,
shit ingredients and shit vibes.
Yeah. So of course your Big Mac's going to sit like a rock. Yeah.
No, not really. Yeah. So, okay. So thinking of that in an optimistic light, like imagine if, and I think this goes for medicine too, because food is medicine. If people were putting good vibes into the food that they made and good intentions, and that often happens too. I'm not going to say that, definitely not going to say that all cooks feel that way. I think some people are really passionate about it.
Yep.
But there are obviously things that could probably be done to make it, to engender this sort of environment, right? But I just wonder, how much, again, for the reason of looking at it the way that we do look at it has gotten us here. Like, how can we look at it differently? Like, how can food be, how can we treat food like medicine?
Well, I mean, animism helps.
Yeah.
I think if you have an animistic worldview, then immediately your relationship to food is going to change for the better, I would argue.
Especially something like soup, okay? Because like you said, it is like a brew, but it's also like a time-honored remedy that you can't, for one thing, you can't really, I mean, I'm sure some of them you can, but like you can't really rush a soup. You really have to kind of take your time with it and build it.
Oh, yeah.
More so than a lot of people might think. Yeah.
I mean, you can take some ramen and throw it in a pot of water and put in the flavor packet and you can have soup in 2 minutes, but it's shitty. Like,
right. And that's like, maybe that's half of the reason why it's not good for you. Like, not just because of, whatever the hell that shit's made out of. And who knows? I mean, it's just, I think it's a good question to ask.
Well, I mean, I've been interested in, doing slow food. That was kind of one of the, well, I guess not the OG food movements, but like early food movements of the, slow food, like basically just the opposite of fast food in whatever that form might be. And so just taking your time and getting to know and, cooking and making it joyful. I think there's been so much focus on how cooking is this burden and you have to make it as fast and efficient as possible because, and you know what, when you are working a 9 to 5 and then you have to go pick up your kids and you gotta come home and everyone's hungry and cranky, you want to have dinner done like quickly, but that's a product of how we live in our
product of how we've modeled our society, right? Just like the reason why the people that work the cooking jobs are so miserable, it's like, well, they get paid shit.
Yeah, they're exploited.
Yeah, right. So exactly.
They're exploited workers. So
like after a long day of exploitation.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
going to look
yeah, yeah.
different.
100%.
That's cool. Yeah, because slow is always going to be better. So take like some ribs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and try to cook them at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. And then take some ribs and cook them at like 175, 200 all fucking day or even
Mm-hmm.
2 days. And tell me which one's better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like one of them's not even edible.
Also, you want to talk about Mars remediation, slow cooked ribs, anything cooked over fire, also
Ooh,
meat in general, slow cooked meat over fire. Hell yeah. There's your Mars remediation. And it's
that's
delicious.
good. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay. This is my Mars, Uranus, North Node meal. That's what I'm going to do. That's my
Nice.
remediation for that, right? Because um if Uranus is
You got to add something weird and surprising at the end for Uranus, though.
okay. Okay. So some kind of interesting glaze, maybe.
Yeah, like something a little like sweet and sour. I don't know. You can play with it.
I'll have to
A
check it out.
surprising
This is a
flavor
good tip though.
first.
This is good
Yeah.
stuff. I think that you've really opened a door for me in terms of food as astrological remediation
You know
just
what?
now.
I have gone on this journey with you because I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but I am so going to do this so
I'm here
much
for
because
this.
high Taurus rising, most of, well, not most, but a lot of planets in
Right.
Cancer. Like if I can make food the solution, I'm there.
Well, like Taurus moon. So same
Yeah.
deal, right? Like
Hell yeah.
it is the gateway to my inner soul.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Nice.
Let's do it. We're going to work on
Yeah.
it. We can compare notes
Oh
later.
yeah. I'll
I
definitely
want to know
compare
how
notes.
those ribs go. That the ribs sound amazing.
Yeah. I haven't made ribs in a while too. I don't eat a lot of pork, but when I do it right.
Yeah. Or you could do beef ribs too.
Beef ribs are good. What's more Marsy? I mean, because beef ribs are more red, I feel like.
Yeah, I think meat on, especially on the
Just
bone in
meat on the bone.
general.
Yeah, there's something
That's
about
Mars. Yeah.
on the bone that's very
Oh yeah,
Mars.
eating it with your hands and getting all
Yeah.
dirty. Like no, that's yeah. Mars will appreciate that for sure.
Nice.
Cool. Should we like totally change the subject and talk about something completely different, or do you
Sure.
have a train of thought you want to follow?
No, we can change the subject.
Okay.
Did you ever remember that thing you wanted to talk about?
No, but I think I did want to share some like spooky stories.
Yeah,
you
spooky
know?
stories are good. That's what I was actually going to ask because I had accidentally skipped it.
Yeah. No, and yes, spooky stories. So I was thinking about this story recently, actually. And then I remember like I feel like I just forget. I don't know. So when you have like strong spirit experiences, they impress themselves upon you. And there this one I'm about to tell, like I will never forget that. That's the one that pops to mind as like my most vivid and visceral like spirit contact type of thing. But then there's so many others. Like as I'm talking to my husband, and I'm like, oh yeah, that thing. And you just it's like I forgot. And like, how did I forget? Well, I think it helps like being in a more magical mindset from a young age and wanting magic, because I remember when I was a kid I wanted magic to be so real, like I just was desperate for it to be real. And at the time it was just like fantasy novels, and then like went on my journey to be like, oh, it is actually real. It doesn't usually look like waving magic wands, sadly, although kind of sometimes. But it's there. It's just
I'm right there with you. That's my experience too.
Yeah. So I think because of having that magical mindset now, when like I have spirit contacts. I mean, it kind of happens all the time if you're paying attention to it.
Yeah.
So you don't even really notice. Like it's just kind of you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that was probably whatever.
It becomes a working part of the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, it always maybe was, but to have awareness for something changes the game.
Yeah, like I was thinking in the office I used to work in was it was a newer building, quite new actually, but it was built on and in the shape of this old hotel downtown that was like 100-year-old hotel, which is really old for my city because it's a Canadian city, so anything that's 100 is like ancient because the city was founded in 1905, so
right.
or four, I guess, whatever. Like it was turn of the century, right, the 1900s, right? So so we don't have like Europe where it's like, oh, 100 is like nothing. Anyway, so it was built on the site of this old hotel, which by the end of its life was just a derelict flop house with a bunch of, drug addicts hanging out in it all the time. So it was pretty rough. And I worked across the street when it was still that. And then I ended up working in the building, a different job, years later after it had been torn down and then rebuilt. And it was office space. And long story short, it was haunted. Like there were some spirits who were still hanging around. They weren't malevolent as far as I could tell. But if you stayed there, not even actually, sometimes this happened when people were around, which was really funny. But of course, when if you stayed late, you're more likely to have it. Like the elevator would open all the time for no reason. I would hear people typing on my desk mate's keyboard all the time, like just like a, where I don't know if you heard that, but it's just distinct. Like just tap 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 tap. Yeah, like, and I was like, Carolyn, are you there? And then I'm like, no, she's left like an hour and a half ago. Yeah. So, and it was just something that happened. And then my sister started working there and I warned her about it. And she's like, that's so scary. And she's like much farther, I guess, down on the path of like spirits are everywhere and part of our world. So I was just like, yeah, oh yeah, they just type, fine, it's fine, whatever. Like you'll hear noises and stuff, like whatever. But yeah, when you talk to someone who's not like in that worldview, it's like, what was that noise? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, a cat, spirit, take a pick. Who cares?
Yeah, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, spooky story. So I go in tangents. So that, I guess that was one. That's like a mild one, like the ghost of the person who typed beside me. I was actually surprised that it was not that malevolent in that building, because there is all sorts of horrible stories of like murders and shit that went down in that hotel.
But think of all the good times that happened in there.
Right. Back in the boomtown days. Yeah, actually there was probably lots of drinking and partying.
I think there's a lot of the times there is a mix.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And sure, like it's probably easier to remember the bad impressions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. So then, so my most vivid experience was in writing on stone, which is in southern Alberta. It's right on the border with Montana. So yeah, so it's really far south, and it's in so it's Badlands area.
And it's called Writing on Stone is the name of the town?
Yeah, it's the park. So there's a provincial park there called Writing on Stone, cool. Asanapi, and I said that horribly, but that's like the indigenous name for it. And so it's called that because there's all these ancient pictographs on the stones there. So it's awesome. This amazing desert landscape of the hoodoos, all these like stone canyon-y type things. It's very cool. Like if you haven't seen it, look up some pictures of Alberta has a few of these pockets of these Badlands areas. They're amazing and super haunted. So they've been a meeting place for indigenous people for ever, right? For good reasons. Once you go there, you're like, oh, I get it. And so there's actually two stories, but I'll tell the big one first. But yeah, so it was, we had done a tour that day of some of the pictographs, right? And gone into the back part of the park. And there was an indigenous elder who led us through that. So it was awesome. It was such a good tour. And then that night, so it was hot, right? Because it's in a desert. So it was smoking hot in the day. So we were sleeping in a tent. And so we left our tent open. There was the screen, but we left the screen so we could see out, right? So I fell asleep, or did I? I was, kind of just looking up at the night sky above me as I'm lying here in the tent. And I didn't think I fell asleep. And then I heard crunching, like someone walking up to the tent, across the gravel. And then I saw a figure just looking in at me as I was lying here in this tent. And I couldn't see any details. It was just a black humanoid figure that kind of looked in at me. And then I kind of started and then blinked and it was gone. And the moon was there, just had risen, I guess, and was at me. So I have thought about this time and again, and it maybe sounds like nothing, but I just had the strongest sense of, oh, that was not human, at all. No way. Looked humanoid, wasn't. It was, I think, as near as I can tell, I think it was just one of the spirits of that place coming to check me out and, see. I didn't get any bad vibes. Didn't really get much of anything. It was more of just a oh, what do you do? Who are you? Kind of, okay. Yeah. And I think because we had gone into the back part of the park that day, maybe, they followed me or they were just whatever. We had kind of poked around a little more than than most people. So yeah, maybe they're just coming to check us out. But yeah, it was just that, that spooky feeling, right? Like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that was not and
Well,
the
that
other.
intuition is a big
Yeah.
part of the experience, I feel like. Well, like, okay, yeah, like I saw something, but then I also knew what it was. And
Hmm.
those are inextricably connected.
Yeah, it was an immediate and innate sense of like, this is not a human
There's a
looking at
psychic
you.
impression. Yeah.
Yes, big time. And it was, yeah, it was just so strong. And like, I know people would just be like, oh, you just fell asleep. And I'm like, I don't think I was sleeping. And if I was sleeping, it was in one of those like lucid dreams where I was like still, my eyes were open because I remember clearly seeing like the night sky and the screen and stuff, right?
And
then
even
also,
that isn't like a good way to brush it off for me,
no.
because it's like, yeah, you're in that liminal place. Like,
Yep.
yeah, you're in the place in between. Like, of course, it's easier to see those things. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you were just half asleep. Like,
Yeah.
no
Or
fucking
like,
shit. I was half asleep. That's when
yeah.
that's
That's when you see things easily.
right.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing too, I guess the other explanation would be like, oh, someone just like came into your campsite and was looking in. And I'm like, dude, that is so much creepier than like a spirit
Yeah.
looking at me. Like some guy just came into my campsite and was like, hey, what's in here? Like, I don't want a human looking at me. That's creepy. Like,
Well, the materialist explanation is either like it's either belittling to you or it's like incredibly dark, I feel like, right? So it's like either you just saw an owl or you're fucking crazy. You know what I mean? Like, oh, thanks. Those are my options. Like,
yeah,
there's
cool.
a third way.
Yeah. That was a good one. And like a couple days before, and this, I just remember this before my husband reminded me, we were in a nearby. So this was not in Writing on Stone, but it was, I guess nearby. It was like a couple hours away, but this is Alberta. You drive for like 3 hours to get anywhere. So it was a place near Medicine Hat called Red Rock Coulee. And it's just that. It's like a little gully that has a bunch of these giant red boulders. It was pretty cool. So we stopped there and we're checking it out. It was the middle of the day. And I decided to do a little journey. And so my husband did some drumming for me to kind of get into the mindset. And so I was sitting on a rock and I was going on a little journey and I was just asking to kind of meet like a spirit guide. And then I kind of opened my eyes and I turned my hand over and there was a black wasp sitting on my palm. And I freaked out because I was like, a wasp, right? And so I started I shook it off and then I looked and it was still on my hand. I was like, ah! And so I'm started to kind of panic and I started running and this wasp was following me, it stayed with me for I ran all the way up the path because I looked like a cartoon, I'm sure. And then, afterwards we were doing the what was that? And he's like, I think that was your guide, babe. I think your guide showed up and you kind of freaked out. And I was like, oh yeah,
so
probably.
Where did you end up when it chased you?
I went up to the car and then once I got to the parking lot, it was gone. It took off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a great example of, I guess, being rude to your spirit guides that show up to you that you've asked to see, and then they show up and then you're like, oh my God. Cause I don't know, not all spirit guides are cute animals, right? Sometimes they're scary looking wasps. Cause I've never seen a wasp like that either. It was black and it had white stripes on it and it looked like it could fuck me up. So I was like, whoa.
Wasps usually do. And I feel like a lot of the time though, it's actually there are more harmless ones than, but they always look mean.
They do. That's what it looks like.
I get bugs a lot. So I get so a lot of bugs, a lot of spiders.
Mm-hmm.
Spider spirit and I are tight.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't like spiders a lot of the time. I love them. They're so cool to me. And you just crawl on me, you're good. And then in the Fairy Queen journey, if anyone's listening that doesn't know what I'm talking about, this is available with a membership to Rune Soup. So if you'd like to check that out, go to runesoup.com. It's well worth the $10 a month. But in that journey, the being that ferried me to the court of the Fairy Queen was a wasp.
Cool.
So I dig it. But it's also funny that it showed up and then you ran away.
Yeah, I did like a little bitch, this is scary. But hey, Look, we can't all be like magical sorceresses. Sometimes we are silly humans who freak out because they see a bug.
Right. Who are totally, yeah, you can always be like totally stoic when like
Right.
a venomous creature is crawling on you.
Yeah, and it was
But
total
if you can,
knee-jerk, yeah.
there's
He didn't sting me. He could have
didn't sting you.
probably.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it followed me for so long, and I'm like, I feel like it could have stung me if it wanted. It was on my hand, so yeah. And normally, like you see here, like wasps tend to sting first and ask questions later, right?
Yeah, because
So,
they can sting multiple times.
oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, and it was a wasp, not a bee. I know what bees look like compared to
Right.
wasps. I kept bees for several years, so like I, for the people who
you
were
did?
like, yeah, we did. We had bees for a
Nice.
while. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, you want to talk about learning how to engage with 60,000 organisms that basically are one organism. Keep some bees. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, I think they were really interesting because bees, that's like ancestor connection for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, because they're a collective and like
Mm-hmm.
often the well ancestors will kind of come through as a collective.
Oh, and I mean, if you
they'll
keep bees, you have an endless supply of fresh honey and ancestors. Big fan. So,
yeah,
yeah.
right. Good stuff. And of course they're connected in a lot of um cosmologies too and mythologies, right?
Yep. Yep. Definitely.
Any more spooky stories you want to share?
Spooky stories. Oh, the lava tubes in Hawaii. That's a good one. So yeah, we were in Hawaii in 2018, and yeah, so this was on the Big Island, and there is a lava tube over near Hilo for anyone who knows Hawaii. And the cool thing about that, so lava tubes are just that, like they're formed from the lava flow going through the earth, and they leave behind like a hollow tube. And most of the ones on the island are in this more southern part, where the closer to where the like more active volcanic volcanoes are, right? Like all of the lava fields and stuff. And they're dry, like they're just rock, right? And they do tours through them and stuff. But there's this one up near Hilo, and Hilo is like the jungle side of the island, so it's all lush and green. And there is a tube that's just off of the main road to Hilo. And so it was like our first day in Hawaii. We had just landed and we were traveling to our Airbnb on that side. So we had spent a couple days in Kona, and then we were going to Hilo. And so I was just flipping through the guidebook, right? And I was like, hey, there's a lava tube over there. Let's stop and go check it out. Sounds cool. And it's so cool, right? It's a cave, right? It's this cave entrance in the jungle, and you go in. And so the cool thing about that tube, because it's on the jungle side, there's like roots and stuff growing down from the ceiling, and so it's like your classic mouth to the underworld, literally, right?
Yeah, I
So
love that.
yeah, so and we weren't even thinking about this consciously at the time. We were just like, cool, let's go check it out. And so we went in there, and there was some people, like families in the entrance, and we were kind of chatting with them, and we were totally not prepared. We had like flip-flops and our phones for light, right? So but we were like, whatever, we're on vacation, we can do this. So we start walking, and then the families kind of went back, and so it was just us. And then we're walking, and it goes like couple miles probably underground. And so we were walking and walking. We're like, should we go to the end? Yeah, we could. So we kind of intended, we're like, yeah, let's see where this thing ends. And then, a couple times we turned off our phone lights so that we could just experience that true. And like, man, if you've never been in a cave and with no light whatsoever, like it's like blackness, darkness that has such texture and is like it's an entity, like being just consumed in that is just, it's like nothing else, right? Like the only time I've come close to that on the surface, I guess, would be in the forests in the West Coast that are so like deep and dark and dense at night that you can actually not see your hand, like a foot in front of your face, but still different when you're under the ground, literally in the earth. So we're walking through this thing, and then we had been kind of chatting, and then we kind of trailed off, and then we're walking in silence, and then I started seeing serpents and tentacles and just spooky, scary shit like in my mind's eye, and started having this feeling of like dread in my chest. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I didn't say anything at first because I thought I was just being irrational, and whatever. You're just getting spooked because you're just in this tube underground where no one can hear you scream. And by the way, there's definitely no cell reception, of course. Um, but I was just like, okay, I just keep going. And then I totally started like looking over like behind me because like I just got this sense of like something behind me, seeing things out of the corner of my eye in the pitch black, sure. And all of a sudden we just both stopped at the same time and we were like, we should go back. And my husband was like, yeah, like right. And I hadn't said anything to him about like feeling weird or seeing things or anything. But we were both just like, stop, no, let's go back. And then we started walking like very quickly out of there. And then we compared notes after, and he was having the exact same thing. He was like seeing things in his mind, and it was like all the like horror for him. It was like all the spooky horror movie sort of imagery coming at him. Like just like one after another, like that. I'm like, and for me, it was just like lots of like tentacly, serpenty type stuff. So I figure there was spirit lived there. Like it was like clearly a land spirit, and we were in its home. And it was malevolent in the sense of it didn't want us there clearly, sure. And it was sending things at us to be like, please leave. And so we did. But that was also, again, one of those experiences. Maybe sounds kind of like meh, unless you've, had similar experiences, and then you can understand what that sort of intensity was like. Cause it was extremely intense. Like when we got out of it, I was like sweating and like felt shaky. And I was just like, whoa, like, whoa, that was no good, but also kind of awesome. But,
Yeah, totally awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, okay, you had that. So you started seeing things a little bit, and then you were like, okay, whatever, and kept going. And then there was a point where you knew, you had a knowing that, okay, no, it's time to turn around.
It wasn't just something in my head. There was a spirit here because didn't want me there, so I should leave because it didn't want me there, and it seemed rather more powerful than me. So
yeah, it was like what are you doing here?
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was like I like there's so much we just don't know, and maybe it was just throwing like, I guess, glamours or illusions at me to make it seem like it was some spooky like serpent creature, but also how classic for underworld deities or for spirits, right? Like, serpents.
It could have just been flexing, like, look at me, I'm a cool snake.
100%.
And then we just we aren't used to that, so we're just like, oh, freaky. And it's like, oh, I was just posing for you, like.
Yeah, come back. Where you going, babe?
Come back and be here forever.
Yeah, never leave me. Oh shit. Well, that's not good either, right? So
I think there's sometimes that vibe with like, because I think there are definitely some spirits that don't take into consideration the fact that you're embodied. So they'll be like, wait, you can't stay down here under the water with me forever? Like, why not?
Yeah. It's like, no. Well, I mean, I could, but then I'm not going to do that. I'm not really willing to do that at this time.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you so much for coming on, Mel. I really enjoyed talking to you. Do you want to say one more time? Like, do you have any social media that you want to give out or anything?
Not really.
Okay, cool.
I mean, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I don't post on Twitter at all because it's gross. And I looked at it today for too long, and I was like, why did I look at Twitter?
There's and like then a weird spirit with it. Like I can't even have it on my phone. Like I use it. Oh no, I deleted it. I use it for promotion.
Yeah, I don't even do that anymore. I do post on Instagram, so you can find me. It's Mel_Priestley. But you know what? Just go to my website if you want to get in touch or see what I'm up to. Everything, my website's up to date. Sign up for my newsletter. That's the best way to stay in touch with what I'm doing. Instagram, I mostly just use to like post and ghost my latest blog articles, right? So I don't engage much on there at all. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Well, very cool. Thank you again for coming on. I had a great time talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here.
And there you have it. Some really thought-provoking stuff there. And another excuse to cook some ribs. Not that I need one. Do you experience weird shit? Have you had experiences that don't lie within the confines of consensus reality with its bogus and bland narrativizing? More importantly, do other people make you feel a little crazy when you talk about it? If you fist pumped or even just said yes to any of these questions, Drop me a line at timjsailor@gmail.com. That's TIMJSAILOR@gmail.com. I'd love to have you on the show and hear your story. Remember, you are never alone. I believe you.